Hello everybody, David Abram here. Welcome back to my channel as always. And for today's topic of discussion, I wanted to talk a little bit about the beauty in simplicity and exactly what I mean by simplicity from a MGTOW's perspective, or at least from my perspective as a MGTOW. Now, to start off, I want every gentleman to think back to a time before women came into their life. Think back to a time before you ever had those urges, or before the thought even crossed your mind. Preferably childhood, maybe early childhood, maybe late childhood, but just think back to that time in your life before women were involved at all. Outside of your mother, that is. I mean, what was your daily routine? What did you do? Did you have any hobbies? Did you enjoy these hobbies? What was your daily routine prior to women entering your life? And I think that's a question that every man should at some point maybe sit down, lay out the cards with themselves, and ultimately ask themselves, what was it like before now? Before women were on my mind, or before the thought ever really even crossed my mind? I know what my daily routine was. My daily routine, roughly around when I was 7 or 8 years old, was I got up in the morning, got myself together, or had an aide, or with one of my parents got myself together, and went to school, did the schoolwork. Couldn't wait to get out of school. School was a drag when you sat in a class for I don't know how long. Then you came home A squared, and what did you do? You turn on that television, plop down, watch some cartoons, maybe go outside, ride your bike around, this, that, and the third. You'd kick a soccer ball around in the backyard, you and your brother, and then you come back inside, play around with some video games on your Nintendo 64, and then you'd watch some more cartoons, especially on Cartoon Fridays, if anybody remembers that block. Cartoon Fridays was phenomenal, by the way. I still look back on that now and wish it were there, but it's not. But nonetheless, that was relatively all I thought about as a kid. I mean, there were no complex red pill or blue pill ideologies. There were no philosophical discussions that crossed my mind. I mean, that was simplicity. And I had hobbies. I even collected those G.I. Joe action figures and those little green plastic army men that came in those packages. I collected action figures, I played with action figures, kicked balls around, rode my bicycle, watched cartoons, played video games, and that was childhood. And that was essentially what I lived for. I wasn't bound to live for a female companion. I wasn't bound to seek attention from the opposite sex. I had a list of hobbies, and my time was occupied by those hobbies. I mean, yeah, sure, being a kid, I didn't have as much responsibility, and I didn't have as much on my plate, other than my schoolwork and maybe perhaps making sure I got up in the morning. But I mean, aside from that, I had hobbies, and those hobbies was how I defined my happiness. Those hobbies were how I went about my daily routine. And I think today, some men, and I was actually watching another hangout where they were discussing this, why is it that some men return to the plantation even after they're confronted with the red pill? They still remain in the plantation, or they leave the plantation for a short while and they come back to the plantation maybe a few months down the line, maybe even a few years down the line. And I think the reason for it is there's this preconditioning that we're all exposed to, sort of like this little predisposition to believe that our masculinity, our manhood, and our rite of passage into adulthood is defined by finding a special someone, taking that special someone in under our belt, and providing for them. Really, if you think about it, it's kind of a little bit of a slave mentality, and it's ingrained into us from the time we're born, really up until a certain point where we're confronted with the red pill, and we ultimately do have that decision. And I think a lot of guys, even when they are confronted with this red pill, will willfully choose. Maybe not all men, because otherwise MGTOW wouldn't have sprung up. But there's a certain portion of men that choose to remain on the plantation. Or either they leave the plantation and come back. For whatever their reasons may be, it varies from person to person and man to man. But I think what I'm really driving at in this video, for any MGTOWs listening to this, or any newcomers to MGTOW and the MGTOW philosophy, is that there was some point in the past, before you really had the thought of a companion, where you had a list of hobbies, even if it was just playing video games all day. I mean, I think, on some essence, if we could just return to that mindset in some capacity, if we could recapture that mindset of what it was like before women came into our lives, or before the thought of women even crossed our minds, whenever that was for every man. I know it's probably different for every man. It's different for me, of course. And I think if we can reach that certain point and thought process, I think MGTOW, in an essence, could become a lot more appealing to the younger guys. Because sometimes when they first are confronted with that red pill, it's a big slap in the face. And I think there are ways we can find to essentially make the red pill a little more digestible. Maybe something they can relate to, something more down to earth. Nothing too, evolved and complex, because, I mean, these guys, the blue pill is all they know. So we've got to walk them through step by step and a little bit at a time. And I think that's one of the ways that we could do it. Talk a little bit about the beauty of simplicity as an introduction to the MGTOW philosophy. Let them experience, or let them at least connect to you and themselves on a personal level. So this way, as time goes along and they do look at more red pill content and absorb more red pill ideologies and MGTOW ideologies, it's easier for them to digest, because they've gotten some of the groundworks and then have built their way up. It's sort of like building a house. You usually have to start with a groundwork or some sort of foundation and then extend upon that foundation. I mean, usually you start with the first floor, and then after you get from the first floor, you go to the second floor and the third floor and then the fourth floor, and so on and so on. And I think that's important for us in the MGTOW community to do, in concerns to those just taking the red pill or just finding out about MGTOW. Because the red pill is, I guess you could say, when men take the red pill for the first time, it could be a little bit of a shock. It's like going in from hot water and then suddenly entering cold water. I mean, you could go into shock in certain medical scenarios. So I think it's important, in order to reach some of the newcomers to the MGTOW ideology, start at ground zero. Talk about something related, or something that can metaphorically slip into the MGTOW mindset, such as simplicity. So that's all I got for this video. Oh, one more thing. I know we're exposed or predisposed, like I said earlier in the video, to things such as Beauty and the Beast, Shrek, Snow White, Rapunzel, this, that, and the third. Disney is really good for doing this, but I still think there's some essence of all of our youth days and our childhood, or whatever the case may be for any man, where we have this simplicity. And that simplicity was what defined us as boys at that time, if you will. So I think if we could somewhat get back to that point with younger guys, maybe the 20-somethings and those in their late teens, then I think the red pill will be a lot easier for them to digest. I think, in some essence, we have to form those connections with terms that they're familiar with, and then apply that to the gender dynamics within society. So this way, when they take the red pill, it's not as much of a shock to them. So, baby steps. Baby steps, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. So, I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts about simplicity, and how we can use this concept of simplicity to sort of reach the younger demographics of MGTOW and the ones just taking it for the first time. But what do you MGTOWs think? Do you think I'm spot on with this one? Did I miss anything? If you have any resonating thoughts on this matter, please do feel free to leave them in the comment sections below. please like, subscribe. If you disagree, also please do feel free to elaborate in the comment sections below. And until the next time, thanks for watching.